My name is Markus. I'm from Uffective. We are a Dutch software company. We do software called Uffective, which is basically all about digitalizing management processes and decision-making processes. Today's call is not going to be so much about us. It's really going to be about a best practice of basically selecting and implementing and running a global IT portfolio management software. And for that purpose, we basically have looked into our, let's say, different implementations across customers and selected E.ON as one of, let's say, the leading and best-in-class, let's say, IT portfolio management practices we've seen. And today we're going to talk to basically the guy who made it all happen, Tobias. Tobias Hartwich. Welcome, Tobias.
Thanks a lot, Markus. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Tobias, maybe if you just introduce yourself with a couple of words. Who are you? In which function are you working? Exactly.
Sure, happy to. So hi everybody, my name is Tobias Hartwich. I'm 42. I'm working in E.ON Digital Technology. That's the IT function of E.ON. I joined E.ON already in 2008. That's long ago somehow. And I had various positions. Most of them were in wholesale gas. That was the former Rogas business. And I joined my current function in early 2018. And that's the global portfolio management function, as it's called. And so we are taking care of our IT investment. You may also call it project portfolio. So that's my role there as an analyst.
Cool. So we have also Sarah with us. Sarah is basically managing our chat and our, let's say, questions here. So we want to have basically this session as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please use, let's say, the Q&A session or the chat. Post your questions, and then we will answer them as good as we can. So Tobias, if we go back, so let's say our business relationship now lasts for over 3 years. I think we just had, let's say, the 3-year anniversary of, let's say, the Uffective platform basically being implemented in E.ON. But if you go back 3 years, can you describe a little bit, let's say, the situation you found yourself as a global IT service unit in? So what was the situation back then? Why did you go for a global tender? What made you basically change the current provider to a new provider? Can you, let's say, think back a little bit?
Yeah. So when I joined portfolio management, it was a new function. So it was really founded from scratch. And we basically had like nothing in place. So new head of portfolio management, new team, really small team. So we really started with 2 people and our boss at that time. So we kind of had nothing. So there was a tool in place, but that was not really managed anymore, and people hated it. There were no processes. We had no contact persons in the different local portfolios. We had no framework. That was what we had. So it was kind of a greenfield approach, so to say. And the decision to get a tool, that was quite clear right from the beginning, because we're talking about an investment portfolio at this moment that's it's more than 500 million euros per year that we're spending on IT investments. And so it's really a high number of projects, and they're running all across Europe. So and if you try to manage that via Excel spreadsheets, PowerPoints or something, you'll soon find out that's not the way to go. So it was clear right from the beginning, we need a tool that is really more stable than Excel or Access or whatever from the Office point of view. And that was how it all started. So it was really from scratch. Whenever we were looking for some project information, we kind of relied on some PowerPoints being sent to us or whatsoever, but it was kind of a chaos in the data that there was. So it was kind of a coincidence whenever we found some good data quality in place, but there were no processes behind anything. So that was the situation that we had like 3.5 years ago.
Okay. And did you then basically go for like a perfect requirement specification to really, you know, I don't know, have a workbook, 80 pages describing what are the functionalities you're looking for, what are the insights you're looking for, what would it take for a system provider basically to be selected? Or did you choose another approach where maybe you kept it a little bit smaller and also changed the scope while you basically implemented a new approach?
Well, what we had was like a list of requirements. You may call it backlog or something, and that was quite it in those days. And actually, we found ourselves pretty much prepared actually to implement a tool. From a point of view today, I would say we were pretty naive in those days and not really experienced, because we weren't experienced. But that was basically it. And actually, I looked into that backlog the other day, and what I find was fairly generic, I would say, because you know, when you think about what kind of attributes do you want to have in the tool, what kind of processes are you going to run, it simply makes a huge difference if it's on paper or in an Excel spreadsheet, or if you really run a live tool, because reality is always pretty different. And what we did actually right from the beginning, and actually ever since we took the tool live, we always reacted pretty quickly on user feedback, and we tried to be as I don't want to call it agile, but as quickly responding to user feedback as possible, because in my perception, this is what shows users we are taking care of your concerns and of your feedback, and we're really constantly trying to improve the tool and make it also a useful tool for you, not only for us as a central function from the ivory tower, but also like for the local users.
Before we get basically also to you know, what made the implementation successful, maybe a little bit again back to the start, were there certain pressures from top management to say, well, we need, you know, a better insight into certain questions we have? So how many projects are we running? What is our total spend? So were there a requirement on reporting which basically made you move, or were there certain, let's say, answers you were looking for before implementing the tool, and what were those?
You know, the initial start of our function those days came directly from the E.ON SE board, so really from the top, and it was a bit like, I have the impression that we're not running well our IT investments. So it's hard to get an overview, and I would like to have this structured. This is actually how it started. So pretty informal, I would say. And and we as a small team, we should now like change the approach or the governance, if you call it that way. So so that was it. And it was not really about, I would like to see this report, I want to have that KPI, I want this and that. It was rather like a gut feeling, I would say, from our top management. In a way, there is no common governance. We're not following a basic framework. So everybody is just running the local portfolio in the way that it makes sense locally, but there is no overview centrally, which is bad, because whenever it comes to something like synergies or so, you're absolutely blind, because no Excel spreadsheet from unit A matches an Excel spreadsheet from unit B. And so the origin was rather like a gut feeling, like this is not structured, and we want it to be structured. And this is when we as a function came into the game.
Okay. And now we from Uffective, we always say that, you know, it's relatively easy to purchase a software. It's also not maybe easy, but it's a process to implement a software. But then it's not so easy to really gain broad user acceptance over time. So the question, how does basically then a software, a platform succeed in a corporation over time? How is usage growing? How do you really get broad user acceptance? For all the listeners, what will be your advice there? So how did you manage basically to manage that implementation process well and gain you know, user acceptance over time?
how many hours do I have to answer? But there is not this one single answer here. So, but I can mention some aspects that worked well with us. So one thing was, because we were such a small team and I was the only one responsible for the tool, people could ask me. So they knew me, and they could turn their questions to me personally. So it was not a mailbox and anonymously where you can send your emails to. So it was me, and people could call me. So I think looking back, that was really something important, because I could then directly help people. The other thing was, if you get access to the people because they call you and ask you something, they automatically provide feedback to you, and we always tried to work in that feedback. And I think this is what users appreciate a lot. And another thing which I always found pretty important was, I always try to find other functions, and the most important function here was the controlling function, that also needed data, and the same data that we would need. So, and if you think about a portfolio management function, so what happens if you don't provide data to such a function? Well, there may be an executive that is a bit mad with you and writes some bad emails, but actually nothing more really happens. But what if you don't provide data to controlling? You may end up having no budget in your forecast, which is significantly worse than a mad manager. So I always try to find, say, some allies in the company. And the most important ally I found and have is the controlling function, because on the one hand, it made our processes more efficient, because there was a huge overlap of our data needs, and we simply could put together our processes and make them more efficient for the users, which they obviously liked. And our data became somewhat more mandatory to be filled, because if you don't have your data in the forecast, you don't have any budget. And this is what I could benefit from. So, and I would believe this is true for most of the companies, because a portfolio management function is never so mandatory somehow, but controlling always needs to have data in the end, because yeah, you need a budget in the end. And I think this was also key.
Yeah, so you said basically a benefit for the user training. I think you provided endless hours of training.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the question there on training is, I mean, is it because, you know, the tool is like complex? Is it because, you know, it's just a new tool, people need to get adjusted to, let's say, a new process? Is it, you know, why did you give trainings?
You know, it's a lot comes together. So on the one hand, if you have a new tool, I think it's just a cultural thing that you explain it to users. And with many other tools I see in E.ON, you have like one basic training and that was it. And that training then is given to 200 people. And there's no time to really ask your question, and people somehow feel let alone. And I think from a cultural point of view, I think that's not good. So I believe you kind of owe it to your colleagues to explain that tool to them with enough time and so on. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, I use trainings also to get to know people, and they then know me, and they know who they can address their questions to. And I believe it's really important to know your users, because whenever there's something new in the tool, or you would like to bring in another process, it's always good to have users that challenge your ideas and that give you a feedback. And I think every tool owner, maybe in the call, will know that situation. There are those like 3, 4, 5 people. They have been in the company forever. They know everything. They know way more details than you do. And when they say, Tobias, that's a good idea, that's well done, then you know that's well done. If they say, Tobias, you forgot something, then I know, I think I really forgot something. And it's important to get that feedback, to get a good solution in the end. And that's what I use trainings for, because I want to have feedback and I want to really improve our tool and especially the processes, because only if they really perform, then people are satisfied and they also feel appreciated as a user. Because if you simply just implement a tool and say, guys, this is it, use it, they don't feel appreciated. But trying to make users feel appreciated and understood, and once they provide feedback, to react on that, I think that's just a human thing, right? So users feel what I say matters somehow, and people react to that, and then they will be a bit more willing to enter data into your tool. So I think that's something human and something cultural, and to me that was really important, and it also has proven to be successful.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about what type of business processes are supported now by the software. So can you maybe outline the one or the two main processes? So what is the software used for? What is the main two processes it's used for? And the second one, maybe, what are also smaller, let's say, additions to the main process which you implemented after you've implemented the main process, and which also then convinced users that it makes sense to basically go for it?
Well, the main process is, do we call that portfolio management process, which simply means you get information on your IT investments. So that's not really exciting, because what kind of information do you ask for? Well, like a project description, like start and end date, budgets, of course, some classifications that you handle via flags, and so not too exciting, I would say, from a data perspective. But something that we added really soon after we went live is a process to create WBS codes out of Uffective. And that's, of course, extremely relevant to project managers, because if you can't spend any money, it's difficult to achieve something in your project. So that was a huge boost for the tool, and it was also cool for our efficiency, because we could really get rid of a bad Excel spreadsheet at that time that everybody hated and that nobody could really change anymore. So that was one of the top developments that we had. And the other development I would think of is we're now running our forecasting process for our midterm plan out of Uffective. And that's a huge achievement that we have reached this year.
Talking about huge achievements, let's say you touched also a little bit about the milestones over the last 3 years. What were the key milestones? So you said basically the forecasting process is one. So you started with the portfolio management process, and then you basically said, well, let's maybe also put the forecast in it, so that you can basically reference to the finance colleagues, what is the budget we need for a certain time period. What were other key milestones in your opinion?
The other key milestone is really a pure technical one, and that was the installation of the you call it MultiCloud as a product. So that's basically a database that we implemented in the cloud. But maybe that's something for you to explain if you want to.
All right. So the Uffective MultiCloud is the concept. So whenever we implement Uffective with a customer, I think very early after implementation, the customer says, well, how do I get my data out of Uffective? And there are two drivers for it. One is basically, am I totally reliant on the provider, on the tool provider? So do I have an opportunity to basically extract my data whenever I want, to also be able basically to change provider? That's one. But the main interest of customers is, I want to get my data out in order to run my reporting and draw my insights from all those data points I'm basically capturing in Uffective. And there we are offering a broad, let's say, area of possibilities to get the data out. I mean, the most simple one, which we don't use a lot, obviously, is Excel. We don't use it so much any longer. But the more sophisticated one is that we basically provide a real-time copy of the entire, let's say, database into, let's say, databases of our customers. So for them basically to be able to create a data lake, a data reporting area where they also can mesh the Uffective data with other, let's say, information points from other software tools they are running, in order to create all the, let's say, reporting they want. So we basically, in close to real time, dump our data into clouds of the customer. So they basically put then their Power BI or Tableau and BI tools on it and create the, let's say, reportings they require. And this is something which you also did quite early on, I would say.
Yeah, we kind of developed that together somehow, I have the impression.
That's
and,
right.
and actually, when you say the implementation of this database has been one of the key milestones, and actually I would call it like the very key milestone, at least from a technical point of view. A lot of people are puzzled when I talk about that, and they ask you, well, it's only about data, right? And I say, yeah, because it's about data. Because when you try to create a dashboard out of Excel spreadsheets, that is possible, of course, but updating that dashboard is really painful, and having that almost real-time database now simply enables me to quickly create dashboards based on that database, and I don't need to worry about any update process anymore, because that can be handled automatically. But our database, I can say that runs in Microsoft Azure, and like many other big companies, we're also using the Office 365 products from Microsoft, and Power BI is one part of that. And then you can really easily connect to that. And you cannot only base dashboards on that, you cannot only download that to Excel or something, you can also use that database as an interface to other tools. And this is what we're also doing. So we're connecting some tools from other functions in E.ON also via this database. And that's pretty easy, because it's an SQL database, and that's standard as standard can be technically. And therefore, it's just such a simple and practical solution that we have. And it simply frees up my time to take care of even cooler analyses and something. Because I remember a time when I had a dashboard and I needed to update that out of Excel spreadsheets, and that took me more than half a day, and that's really long. And you know, once you have a cool dashboard, your managers start to demand more and more. But if updating something always takes you half a day, you're just getting nowhere in the end.
Yeah.
And the solution now just took everything away from me like that. Of course, to run the database, you need some skills in SQL. So I also needed to learn something in there. And I was quite lucky. I had some support from our IT colleagues in E.ON, but it's definitely worth it.
We have a question coming in, which is how important are integrations to Uffective? Which are the main integrations you are seeing? And it's important to be able to integrate Uffective with IT tools like Jira from Atlassian.
Yeah, that's something that people ask quite regularly. In our implementation, this is not so important, because we're completely focusing on portfolio management, and Jira has its strength in project management. And of course, there are some overlapping areas, but the data that we ask for in portfolio management is really high level. Of course, we are able to track something like milestones or KPIs, but it's by far not sufficient to really actively manage a project somehow. And I think we have successfully managed to keep the data set that we ask for quite small. So it's not a lot of information that we ask for, but that information is meaningful. So in our implementation, it's not so important to integrate other project management tools in here. There may be other situations. So when you think of smaller companies and you have a local implementation, then it could be absolutely crucial that you avoid double entries of data. That can of course happen, but for project management, that's not so relevant. The situation as we have it here, so I've talked about the controlling function, and yes, there we are integrating with some tools, partly via a semi-manual process, which is wanted that way because there is a thorough data quality control in between and people don't want to have an automatism. In that case, Uffective is providing an upload file to that other tool. And in another case, we are providing data via the database that I was talking about a minute ago. And this one is then transferred into another tool. So there it makes a lot of sense to implement. But for pure project management, yeah, we have a global implementation. This is why it's simply not so relevant.
It goes without saying that we obviously integrate with Jira if the customer demands that. So basically, I think most of our customers run Jira. I think in more than 50% of the cases, we are technically integrating with Jira. But maybe two more questions before we let you go, Tobias. One is a little bit standard software versus, let's say, something you can customize. So whenever we introduce Uffective to potentially new customers or companies who are interested to us, there at one point in time the question is asked, well, are you guys a standard software and do I have to adapt my process to your software, or are you more like something where I can configure stuff myself and where you are basically a little bit reflecting the processes I have in my organization? Can you talk a little bit about the, let's say, admin functionality, or where would you see, let's say, the pendulum go there? So is it more standard software? Is it more flexible?
Yeah, well, Uffective as a solution is extremely flexible, and this has really developed over the last 3 years. So that's really impressive to see. And I think I was talking about giving a feedback to users. So and that flexibility in the tool. So just as an example, I'm able within a second to add attributes to a project record. I'm able to change budget approvers or something like that, and I can manage like 90% myself in Uffective. And we're working also to get the remaining 10%. To me, that's key, because if I get some input from users, and that is really true, I would like to be able to quickly react to that here. Maybe because I'm impatient, or I simply don't want to rely on anybody else. But if the tool allows me to react to something, that's what users simply perceive and appreciate in here. And I mean, form follows function somehow. And yeah, you should not build processes just because the tool is configured in a way somehow. So and this is why having a flexible tool is something that I would not want to miss, and that would be really a precondition for me when I get a tool.
Got it. Last question. Now, we've looked in the past, we looked into your current implementation. If we look a little bit in the future, there's a lot around machine learning, artificial intelligence, platforms, basically automating processes. Where would you see an IT portfolio management software as ours developing? So where would you see a demand and requirement when it comes to, for example, machine learning?
Yeah, there's a first step that we've already discussed, and that is, well, if you think of our implementation, we have at the moment more than 600 projects which are running. So we're talking about really a big portfolio, and we have units in Sweden, but at the same time we have units in Italy, and it could happen that somebody is doing a project in Italy, but nobody in Sweden knows about that somehow. And unfortunately, there's not a single person that reads through all the project descriptions that there are in Uffective. And for that, I think the tool could help us simply by an artificial intelligence and say, hey, it could be that those two projects are similar and have some overlaps. Don't you want to take a look at that? So that's something that I could imagine, because everything in E.ON is about energy somehow, energy grids, energy sales, energy solutions, whatsoever. So with quite a probability, you should find some keywords which are somewhat identical. And this is something that I could imagine that simply helps us either to find synergies or to bring together the right people so that they can simply have a discussion and exchange best practices, learnings, whatsoever. So that's one thing that I'm thinking about. And the other thing is, well, even though the data set that we ask for is rather small, I would say, users, of course, don't like to enter data into a tool. So who likes to do that? Of course. But what exists in all the companies, definitely the bigger ones in the world, is PowerPoints, right? So you always have PowerPoints about your project endeavors. And what I could think of is an AI. So you upload your presentation into your project record, and the data fields that you ask for are filled by the artificial intelligence, because that recognizes, you see start is 1st of Jan 2022 or something, then you put it into the data field. You see a data field labeled objectives, targets, whatsoever. Okay, that's my project description, and I put it there. So this is something that I could imagine going forward to make it even more easy for the user to bring in data.
All right. Yeah, actually, I mean, we are in Uffective, we're working on, making PowerPoint less and less important because a lot of our customers are using Uffective as also the tool to present and basically automatically generate their status reports. Talking about artificial intelligence, or especially ML, we're currently working on is, especially when it comes to agile implementations, to predict the duration of work items. So how long does, for example, a ticket or a work item take a certain development team to be developed? Who would be the best development team based on basically all the experience we have from the past to take on a certain task? Or when you think about a bid management, so B2B process, what's your win probability if you have certain commercial KPIs based on basically the stuff we know from the past? How successfully have you bidded on bids and won bids? What's your win probability if you have basically certain scenarios in the current bid, and what should you change in order to be more successful to win the bid, apart from obviously decreasing only the price? So this is stuff we're working on. And I think you're right. This is, especially in larger implementations, something where I think the demands of the customers are increasing. Last question: if you have one wish, if you would have one wish free to Uffective, what would that be? So, what would you wish for in order to have an even better implementation?
I think spontaneously, I would want to be able to administer everything in the tool. So really be able to change everything, to bring in everything, also like lists and something, or boards. So this is something that comes to my mind spontaneously, because this admin section simply has helped me so much, and it has made processes so much quicker. So that's something that I can only recommend, that you do as much as possible on your own, because it makes you quicker, it deepens your tool understanding, and in the end your users will simply perceive it.
Tobias, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. We made a recording of this, let's say, broadcast, and we also shared with the community. If there are any questions, I'm sure the people can, let's say, contact me or you directly.
Sure.
To follow up. Thanks everybody for listening. It was our pleasure, and hopefully we have a second session anytime soon. Thanks, Tobias, and thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.